good morning to all of you who are not with us in the room, right? Wherever you are in the world, joining us, right? Welcome, welcome, welcome. Are we almost here, Mary?
Janet, as she mentioned, is
Yes, is mine a little bit late.
and there's
Stranger.
a possibility Adriana
Oh yes, okay.
may come, but everybody else is here.
Okay. So you might be able to see by my clothing anyway that winter is gradually coming upon us. Can you all hear out there in Cyberland? Right? Good. Great. So let's have a few moments of feeling our way into each other in a more subtle fashion than simply looking at each other or exchanging ego labels, right? That we can perhaps just rest into a state of kind of multi-dimensional openness, right? Imagine you're just opening to whatever, right? As if at this moment your primary function in life is that of a welcomer, right? To welcome what's arising. It's so much more satisfying to be a welcomer than to be a denier, right? A kind of a path of denial. Well, I mean, some of you may really prefer that, but I'm going to suggest today a path of welcoming. So we're smiling, because you tend to smile when you're welcoming. Of course we're breathing. And we can see when we're welcoming, we're breathing in a very different way than when we're denying. And so appreciate the breath, the breathing of welcoming. And imagine there's not just one of you that's welcoming, but all of you that's welcoming. Right? Every different aspect that makes you up is welcoming every other aspect that makes you up. Because otherwise you've got a war happening inside the welcome ship. And so perhaps in this settling, something in your back feels that it's not quite comfortable and it kind of wants to shift its posture a bit. And so whatever is beside your back, maybe your front, right? A feeling, a thought, a memory, right? Goes, oh, well, I'll just shift and give you some space, right? And we give each other space. That's the action of welcoming is giving space to others, to all the otherness that we might be at this moment. gradually might see this welcoming and this breathing is a kind of activity of communing. It's a kind of communion that's happening within us and around us and between us. And so rather than meditating, we could say, oh, I'm going to just settle into a flow of communion. And this communion is continuously morphing, shifting, changing, dancing. It's never still for a moment. This kind of ungraspable presence. So we're just smiling and we're breathing and we're continually presenting. And we're becoming familiar with this. Not the words become boring. Oh, I've heard that before, now what? Right? But in the kind of depth of our, or the richness, you might say, of our experience, it's never-endingly engaging. In the immeasurable expanse of nature in process, in faith and trust and wonderment, we give ourselves to this suchness, this seamless mystery of birthing and dying. Spacious, loving, with feet solid in the earth, we nurture the hints of blessedness, the myriad faces and masks of luminous knowing. Moving as this flow of compassion and deepening inquiry, we engage with all beings in ways that support the integrity, the stability, and the beauty of the entire field of life and living, for the sake of all beings, wisdom, compassion, non-clinging engagement. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I think I can hear doors, car doors nearby, so I'm just going to linger for a few more moments, just in case this is the last people coming. Well, just in this moment now, I invite people in the room here to, if you're not doing it already, to just kind of glance around and take into consideration the others, good morning,
Sorry about that.
who are here together in this community. Okay? And for those that are in cyberspace and you only get to see me, switch to your gallery view for a moment. And just have a look at all the people who are also joining us. And we're kind of doing the best we can, right, to have a shared experience here. Many people have observed on and off over the years that we've been having these occasional monthly gatherings, that an important aspect for them is not necessarily so much some teaching that I give, but it's a sense of the importance of coming together in a kind of community of like minds. Right? And I'm remembering quite a few years back, not ancient history, just kind of medieval history. I think it was sometime in the early 1990s, right? That and at the time, unlike the world today, there was a lot of conflict going on. Right? Surely things have improved by then, right? All this Dharma teaching, right? And not only was there conflict between nations, and conflict between the rich and the poor, and conflict between males and females, and conflicts, right, between, you name it, right? But there were also conflicts between religions. And there were conflicts between named paths of Dharma, right? And so you had you still had residues, if you like, of one sect not having anything to do with another sect. Okay? We had in those days a huge, I suppose the whole thing could be summed up in a worldview of us and them. Kind of simplifying it all. Right? There's us and them. And in fact, this worldview was so kind of deeply ingrained that most people had no idea how to operate in any other kind of world. Like in a world in which there's just us, we don't know how to do that because we define us by what we're not. Or we don't do those kinds of things. Right? Or we're anti this, or whatever. Right? And at that time, in the midst of all this kind of, and not only that, but conflict within communities, religious communities themselves. Right? So we're all karma, karju practitioners, and then, but are you drinkong or drukpa, or, right, you have little tiny sort of things happening. This is not ideal. This is not the way it should be, and it's not the fault, if you like, of the tradition. It's the attitudes that we're talking about. And Rinpoche floated an idea, Namgyal Rinpoche, who was my primary teacher, floated an idea around that time. And I think it probably didn't really catch on because you don't hear it that much within the kind of Dharma circles. But it caught on with me. And it just kind of wriggled its way and osmosed its way into the kind of core of my beingness, even though at the beginning I had no idea how to approach it or how to do it. And he talked about a community of friends in Dharma. Okay? Community of friends in Dharma. And this sense of a community of friends in, as I've often kind of pedantically tearing the word Dharma apart, explained, Dar, which is dareti, which means to support or to hold, and Ma, which is mother, mothering, nurturing, right? So Dharma is that which supports and holds and mothers and nurtures us. And it's also the supporting and the holding and the mothering and the nurturing that we do. It's a double whammy kind of thing, it goes in both directions. It's not just the Dharma supports me. The practice of Dharma also means supporting others, right? So a community of friends in holding and supporting and nurturing and mothering each other. Right? And, it's interesting, it's distressing sometimes. It's rather trite to say it's interesting, right? To see that people can feel that they've been involved in Dharma for years and years and years, but they're not actually willing to support and hold and nurture and mother each other. They want to be supported and nurtured and mothered, right? But they somehow are either incapable or unwilling or whatever to support and hold and nurture and mother others. Would you like some water, Mary? You got some? Yeah. Now this kind of, what to call it, is a kind of a view. It's not a meditation technique. It's an attitude, if you like, that we're bringing to our living. Which can, is that attitude there when I'm meditating? Is it there when I'm earning my living, my, getting together the necessities of life, food, clothing, medicine, shelter, and so forth? Is it there then? Okay. And as this kind of soaked into my core, because somehow I found it very painful to see the conflict that was going on. I felt it as very painful. It hurt in my body. Right? It's not nice, right, to feel others suffering. Right? And I suffered over it. Do any of you relate to what I'm talking about? Right? This is really ordinary. And gradually, as that was kind of sinking in, I felt in a way that when we talk about a community of friends, actually, Rinpoche even mentioned this. He said, well, really, you should be a bit more like the Quakers, hence the community of friends. This is a Buddhist teacher giving an example of a Quaker community as a kind of ideal of Dharma. God, yeah, it's not very sectarian. Right? A community of friends, and then we'll add the in Dharma. It kind of makes it a bit Buddhist. Right? But a sense of a universality of this. And as we practice with this in mind, as we explore and live with this in mind, our sense of who are participants in the community expands and expands and expands. I was just saying to Mary, and I were having breakfast on the porch this morning, and as we do most every morning, unless the rain's blowing in that direction, and I was thinking to myself suddenly that some of you would be maybe just getting up, and some of you, we had a late breakfast, some of you might be already getting in your car and starting to drive here from afar. And some of you were doing this and that and the other. And we have, between the number of people in the room and the number of people who are joining us on the Zoom, we have at least somewhere in the vicinity of 70 people. And so I tried to think of, like, and each person who was getting up, right, is unless they're living completely by themselves, is probably involving others in their getting up. Right? Your family or your partner or your kids or your, right? Whatever. Right? And so I was just somehow seeing, could I visualize, could I imagine, could I feel all these different lives, all kind of generally moving on a trajectory which was going to end up being at 10 o'clock kind of located, if you like, in this kind of shared space of engagement. Okay? And I observed to Mary that actually this was so big that I couldn't do it. I couldn't confess. I'd look down the list of the people who were joining us on the Zoom. You know, I remember Christine. I got her. Right, she's there, and then I'd forget about Christine because I'm remembering Terry, and then I'd forget about Terry because I was remembering Leander, and right, they kind of shift around, and my pea brain mind, right, could hardly hold this at all, and I began to see that this is vast. What's going on? The kind of activities of communing which are gradually arising in this is vast. And then I pointed out that actually we're only talking about 70 people and there's 8 billion people. And imagine like 8 billion people, you're visualizing all these lives kind of moving through and affecting each other's, right? But then you see there were a whole flight of, like a flock of silver eyes, these little birds in New Zealand, right? And they came into we've got some salvia just across from the deck, and they love the nectar and the flowers. And so they're all up, hanging upside down and doing this. And Mary pointed out, oh, and them too, right? Because this is like part, and so we start to expand this and we realize that this community of friendly engagement includes birds. It begins to include all creatures. And I thought to myself, you know, when those Buddhists say it's immeasurable, it was a good description. This is immeasurable. We humans have this kind of compulsion to name things. Have you noticed that? You kind of, maybe you don't. But then, of course, we could ask if you're human, right? But there's a kind of compulsion to name things. And you see, when I think of a community of friends in Dharma, I began to realize that for many beings that did expand quite hugely to include many, many, many human beings. But it didn't necessarily expand to include the microfauna in the soil. Okay? And so I'd never pursued that to kind of publicly name this community of friends in Dharma. Community means Sangha. Okay? I'm jumping around a bit, but I think there's a point here which is really valuable. Right? That, Sangha is one of the three refuges in Buddhism. Right? You take refuge in the Buddha, you take refuge in the Dharma, you take refuge in the Sangha. And when I first met with it, I knew that the Sangha were kind of professional Buddhists, right, as opposed to kind of part-time Buddhists, amateur Buddhists, right? And then you had professional Buddhists, right? They were the Sangha. And, well, I kind of did that because I was supposed to. I didn't mind bowing down in front of a statue because I knew the statue wasn't the Buddha, right? But I knew it symbolized something extraordinary and fantastic, but I had no idea what it was, but I wanted it, right? So I'll take refuge. I'll reach out for something important from the Buddha, right? And I'll kind of reach out for Dharma. I thought I got. Dharma was practice. It was like staying with your breathing, doing 100,000 prostrations, practicing yoga, right? It was the practice, right? I could see that. I take refuge in that. I didn't know what Buddha was, but I kind of knew what my practice was. Don't do this and don't do that. Simple at the beginning, right? But I must admit that taking refuge in the Sangha was something I did on faith. Right? I mean, they said, well, you should, I'll throw in the Sangha, but I wasn't really sure if I wanted to bow down to these bald-headed guys in robes. Right? Monks and nuns and so on. And it became immensely worse when I became one of those bald-headed guys in robes. Right? And still felt thoroughly confused and messed up. And I thought, well, how on earth can being a member of the Sangha be a refuge for beings? Right? What kind of a refuge is this? Right? So I just said, oh, well, never mind. I'll come back to it later. Maybe there's something else in here. I'll just take refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma. And actually, I don't know what Buddha is, so forget about that. I'll just take refuge in the Dharma. But I remember, now we'll go back into ancient history. Before Namgyal Rinpoche existed. And there was an extraordinarily talented, charismatic teacher who looked amazingly like Namgyal Rinpoche, except he was a Nanda Bodhi bhikkhu. Right? And this was, now we're talking about in the early 1970s. Okay? And I can remember him saying very clearly, that you take refuge in the Aryan Sangha. Right? That Aryan, the word Aryan has a kind of a bad connotation nowadays because we kind of associate it with the Aryan race and Hitler and Nazism and all that kind of stuff. But Aryan is actually a Sanskrit word and it just means noble. Right? And he said, and the noble Sangha has nothing to do with people wearing robes. He said the noble Sangha is invisible. He said you have to realize it, and when you've realized it, you can see other beings are part of it. And they recognize each other, but nobody else can see them. This is community. the noble community. And so imagine for a moment, let's jump this up to our Sunday classes now. Imagine a kind of Eco-sattva community, Bodhisattva, Eco-sattva community. Okay? Or perhaps I'll kind of float a wild idea. It's almost embarrassing for me, but I'm going to float it, right? Because actually it means a lot for me. Imagine a green Dharma community. Right? Something that's hinting at our kind of rootedness in nature, that supports and holds and nurtures and mothers us, and that we support and hold and nurture and mother, right? And, you know, in a sense, someone can do this and be a Buddhist. And someone can do this and be a Christian. And someone can do this and be an atheist. And someone can do this and be a scientist. And someone could do this and be an artist or a musician. Right? This kind of their green Dharma community-ness, it's invisible in the sense that it is thoroughly and totally universal. Right? And it's a realization. And you think of like the importance it is to have friends with shared values. And to have a sense that, you know, this person is kind of weird and quirky and they do this and that, but you can see this being is deeply committed to Dharma, a life of Dharma. And there's something fundamentally good about that. Okay? And this becomes a kind of a basis, if you like, of community. I'm thinking in a way that a green Dharma community would have also kind of very, very simple, general, what to call it, themes, right? That anyone who felt that they were in there would feel strengthened by. Yeah. And so we can begin to see, in a sense, like there's or Eco-sattva community. I mean, this is the same thing, you know. There's like a being a beingness that involves the whole ecology of life. Okay? And we would begin. There's certain kinds of qualities that would be there in this Eco-sattva, right? There would be kind of an Eco-sattva aspiration, if you like, a Bodhisattva aspiration. Okay? However innumerable beings are, I aspire to meet them with kindness and interest. If we're not doing this when we're meditating, I don't think our meditation is necessarily going to bring us to that. It's strangely enough, on this path of Dharma, you have to begin with awakening and then fill in the details. You don't do lots of details and then eventually get to awakening. It's really not a ladder that you climb from the bottom up and finally get to the top. Right? But there may be a sense of enlarging of your confidence and competence. Okay? How ever inexhaustible the states of suffering are. I aspire to touch them with patience and love. Okay? And we get, this is what I'm working on. And I really appreciate engaging with others who demonstrate that they too are working on this. This is our shared values. Not our values aren't just stuff we say, well, that's this. It's our action. It's kind of what we do, right? However immeasurable the dharmas are, I vow to explore them deeply and thoroughly, right? To really investigate what nurtures, holds, supports, and mothers, and what that involves, and how to do this well. This is big. These are huge kinds of things, right? You don't have to be reciting something like this. It's not a badge that joins you up to such a community. But it's an invisible way of living. Invisible because you don't even need to name it. It's just there. Which we increasingly value. However incomparable the mystery of interbeing, interknowing, interconnectedness, right? I vow to surrender into it fully. Right? And, you know, this could be just a kind of fundamental thing. You get up in the morning and you touch on that till it's so deeply ingrained in your being that you don't need to say anything. You don't need to touch on it anymore. It's just there, right? But it's also something that when it's not quite there, because have you noticed this, that some days it's really there, for a whole week it's there, for a whole month it's there, and then all of a sudden it's not there, right? And how do we remember what we have currently forgotten? Okay? Well, sometimes it can be helpful to kind of remember something like this. However innumerable beings are. I don't know what to do here, but I'm going to explore the possibility of meeting this thing, this being, because everything is being the thing it's being. So beings aren't just living beings. Rocks are being. They're being rocks. Right? And thoughts are being. They're being thoughts. Right? So it's like meeting thoughts with kindness and interest. Meeting the whole, it's an extent of, we're back to welcome again. We're back to smiling. Now, this Bodhisattva vow, or Eco-sattva aspiration, we might say, is also within Buddhism, right? It's a reflection of a profound kind of area to be appreciated, which is called bodhicitta. Right? And sometimes we talk about bodhicitta as kind of like the heart of Dharma, the heart of awakening. Right? Only we're talking about the bodhicitta from a universal perspective, from the heart of Dharma from a universal perspective, not this sect or that sect. Right? And at the beginning, it might feel more of an aspiration. There's a yearning to kind of meet friends on the path. We're yearning to have a sense of belonging. If you haven't got to the point of confessing to yourself that you have a yearning for a sense of belonging, I would suggest that you're still deeply muddled in confusion. Right? You may refine what it is that you're hoping to belong to or with, right? But I mean, surely you're not having a deep yearning to have a sense of absolute separation and disconnect, right? Right? Oh, may I be fragmented and disconnected. 100,000 prayers for fragmentation and disconnect. Of course you want a sense of belonging. And so we want a sense of belonging in this kind of interpersonal relationship with a particular person, right? Or with a particular whānau, or a particular family, or a particular community, a particular evangelical church group, a particular Buddhist sect, right? We're looking for our sense, we're yearning to have this sense of belonging, and meanwhile we're still walking on the earth instead of being the earth walking. Okay? Underneath our feet, every single step, we're stepping on countless numbers of living beings, and often completely oblivious to that fact. We build houses on the earth, right? We mine minerals from the earth by planting fields of corn. Right? We don't garden. We mine. Strip mine. So we have this kind of, imagine you have this yearning, and so our aspiration, this aspiration bodhicitta, right? I will meet all beings with kindness and interest. And as you kind of aspire to do this, interestingly enough, you tend to kind of meet people who share your aspiration. Right? They fall down now it's all the language of today, it's like you fall down the rabbit hole of your particular quirky aspiration. Right? We're going to defend ourselves from all those kind of vaccinators. We're going to defend ourselves from those anti-vaccinators. We're going to, it doesn't matter what it is. It's like we fall down this kind of rabbit hole of kind of self-fulfilling opinions and views and so on. Right? So how about falling down the rabbit hole? Maybe rabbit holes are stuff you just fall down. Maybe that's not an option. Maybe Alice was right. There's the only way you get into Wonderland is by falling down the rabbit hole. So the question that we might have some say in is, which rabbit hole do we fall down? Okay? And so it's interesting that we might meet beings with shared aspirations, and by the way, have you noticed this, that how by time you realized that your parents had attitudes, aspirations, it was too late. You didn't realize they had aspirations and attitudes and then proceed to absorb them. You were absorbing them all along, and then you realized it, and then you thought, oh my God, I don't know if I went down this rabbit hole. I went down the Hearn family rabbit hole. Right? The Hearn-Smith rabbit hole. Okay? So I got all this view of the universe according to Hearn-Smiths. Right? Or according to Republicans, or according to Democrats, or according to Buddhists, or according to, right? So now as adults, we might make a choice. I'm going to maybe increase the possibility of falling down the rabbit hole of Eco-sattva aspiration. Okay? That I actually begin to, and in a sense, like we pick up by osmosis, before we even know the other person's interested in this, you're already kind of feeling it from them. It's just the way they pick up the teacup shows a mind that's filled with meeting beings with kindness and interest and patience and love, which is really different than how they pick up the teacup when they're meeting beings with suspicion and aggression and so on. You pick up the teacup differently. You cook the meal differently. You drive the car differently. I mean, we need a bit more road love. I mean, they talk about road rage, like everyone's driving along, and then someone, honk, honk, right? And you're just minding your own business, and suddenly, bang, you're in this kind of wretched, angry, gritty teeth thing kind of thing, right? Well, imagine for a moment, right, and you picked it up kind of just by osmosis. Have you noticed you kind of pick up each other's feelings? People say, oh, I'm too transparent, I'm too kind of vulnerable in my feelings? How do I protect myself from being overwhelmed by other people's suffering? Right? We pick up. This is how life works. We're most of our response to each other is unconscious. And a tiny bit of it is the story we make up about it. But we're already engaging. Right? So begin first of all by aspiring to this, and then gradually the aspiration bodhicitta begins to just very almost like invisibly morph into something that's just slightly different. And it's no longer so much aspiration, but it's engaged bodhicitta. Engaging bodhicitta. Okay? And this is where you start to actually have a feeling of wanting to actively and consciously augment this process rather than just hope it happens. Okay? And so we begin to look into the 6 parami that we have been looking at. Right? Well, first of all, the 3, right? Prajna, samadhi, and sila. And then we saw how sila could be divided up into the 4 basic parami. Right? And we've spoken a bit in our Sunday classes, and I apologize now for the people who are only sporadically joining us, or if some of you might have followed along consistently through, but there is a kind of theme that I'm slowly nudging along. Every Sunday, you may have already noticed that every Sunday I say everything all over again. Right? But hopefully maybe just add a little bit, just a little bit more that we could add. Right? And we've spoken a bit about the first parami, which is this cultivating an attitude of generosity, of giving. Right? And then out of that more generous sort of flow of living emerges a kind of an increasing wholesomeness of the nature of our relationships, right? That we begin to engage in our relationships with others in ways that take into account that kind of support the increasing realization of wholeness on the part of all the beings involved in the relationship. It's not just wholesome for me. If it's wholesome for me but it's unwholesome for you, it's not. It's maybe partly whole, and as I jokingly say many times, the word isn't whole, the word's wholesome. Right? So it's only somewhat whole. It's right? We're not making grand claims of totality and wholeness. Right? But we could say, could I live in a direction that's somewhat in the direction of the possibility of appreciating the wholeness of this, increasing wholenesses. And so last week we had this extraordinarily long class, which was just me falling into an old habit pattern. Call it doing Antarctica again, right? But because we were covering this massive topic, right, which I was referring to then as 5 wholesome life trainings. Okay? And these are really the kind of like the 5 precepts in positive expression. And we're working on that. And today I would like to say a little bit about an unfortunate reality that creeps in somewhere around this point in the process. Right? And what I'm referring to is this. Right? In the process of having this high aspiration to meet all beings with kindness and interest and touch difficulties with patience and love and explore the dharmas and surrender into the interbeingness and cultivate generosity and support and appreciate the systemic nature of all living beings and develop the mind of spontaneous generosity and use the senses to explore awakening and communicate in skillful and compassionate manners and feed ourselves, nurture ourselves and others in ways that support awakening. Right? We're in the midst of all of this and it's all very wonderful and everything's like glorious, and isn't it? And then it's not so glorious. Have you ever noticed that? Right? You're walking along and suddenly, crap. Right? You got pain, or you got difficulty, or you've got confusion. Have you ever come across this? You're launched on this brilliant path of awakening and meaningful living and so on. Everything's hunky-dory, and then just what? Hunky what? It's just a hunk. Right? It kind of slips away so fast. It's just kind of like, it's like sublimation, of like ice, where the ice crystals leap into gaseous, the water in ice form leaps into gaseous form, and there's no liquid in between. It's just instantly vanished, right? And you got this lovely mind state, and you go, oh, my Dharma practice is going really well. What we really mean is, I like this particular mind state, right? And I don't like that one. It's it's by saying I like this one, you're almost automatically saying I don't like that one. And so you see, the third parami becomes just a painful necessity. It's Ksanti-parami. It's called patience. And this is bringing us up to what I'd like to mention today. But before we look into this kind of, each one of these, what to call it, I think of them as life supports. They're kind of supports for meaningful, wholesome living, rather than a practice. Right? And so I use that. It's a support. And it's not a support if I don't use it. I've got a walking stick. When it's sitting in the cupboard, it's not a support. When I'm holding it in my hand walking up the path, it is a support. Supports are only supports when we use them. Okay? So there's something here we can use. And so all of these aspects are supports. So let me just quickly review this whole thing. Here we are, a community of friends in Dharma, right? Whatever you want to call it, right? A green Dharma community. I like that because for me, green just immediately invokes green plants and immediately throws the story of this journey back hundreds of millions of years, right? In fact, billions of years, right? Not plants, right? But photosynthesizing bacteria. Okay? And so this is my community. Big. And I kind of like that. It's green. It's kind of hinting at that. I have a kind of a secret idea with Green Dharma community, which of course I can't tell anybody, because if I tell people, then they kind of like, some people don't like that. But you see, I get really moved by. I have been moved, and I am still moved by a lot of Sufi poetry. And green is kind of a color of Islam. And the word Islam actually means surrender. Mm-hmm. And so there's this kind of like secret little added teaching that's in there for me. When I go green Dharma treasure, I think of surrender, right? And green Dharma treasure is just an attempt to provide. I can talk about this green Dharma community now because there's a whole pile of supports for it already available. It's taken years to bring them into being, or to write this particular description of them. And so we have this sense of somehow intuiting an invisible communion of life. As soon as you try and grab it, it slips away. It's very subtle. It's this Aryan Sangha, right? It has shared values in a sense, right? Of kind of mutual support. The pollinator supporting the plant supporting the pollinator, right? This kind of, right, reciprocal relating at every level of being. Okay? And gradually we have a kind of a dawning of this dissonance, if you like, a recognition of a dissonance between this kind of intuitive sense of something which is extraordinarily harmonious and inclusive, and these moments of feeling kind of fractured and separated and struggling, right? And out of that kind of dissonance comes an aspiration to kind of nudge this project, if you like, as best I can in a direction of goodness. And so, with this in mind, I'd like to just pause for a moment before I say something further about Ksanti-parami, and see if there are any observations or questions that are arising from your explorations of deep and profound and meaningful communing, Dharma. Right? Just see if there are any observations or questions or sharings. Right? Think of this as a kind of a Sangha sharing. Right? That we begin to, when we hear, that person's, oh yeah, I know that one. Oh yeah, it's not just me. It's not just Tarchin. This is universal. And it's all over the world, right? If we include, it's different. Unfortunately, I can't get to see the screen and you get to see the screen at the same time. But if we were in this room, we could gradually forget about Brazil, and we could forget about Kamloops, and we could forget about other places in the world, right? And just think that we are the whole world here. And this is the most important thing in the world is at 9 Windridge Lane. But I'm kind of constantly reminded that we are in this kind of, I can't really grab a Zoom. It's kind of ungraspable. I don't understand it, right? It slips through my fingers, right? And yet there's somehow this sense of connectedness, right? And to somehow remember that through sharing with each other things which are deeply important, right? There's insights that are coming, juicy challenges that we're wrestling with, right? There's all kinds of things. Are there any observations, questions? Not that I'm going to answer them. We just want to share our questions.
Well, I found it, before you mentioned Islam meaning surrender, that word surrender was coming up for me, surrendering to patience, surrendering to generosity, surrendering to falling down the rabbit hole. And so the surrendering, I am going to surrender. So surrender what? And what is the I that is going to surrender what? What's going on with the surrendering process? Letting go? Giving up? What are we talking about? Surrendering.
I think this is a question which each one of us has to really wrestle with for a long period of time, because it's a big question. Yeah. And actually, when I talk about patience, I have to talk more about that. Yeah.
It's like getting into flow, you might say. So it sort of comes into this dialogue, surrendering.
Just interrupting Kelvin just for a moment. Can the people in the on the Zoom, can you hear Kelvin? Yeah. I want to make sure. And so if any of you do speak from the Zoom, I might just fiddle a little bit to make sure that it's loud enough for everyone in the room to hear as well. Yeah.
If anyone speaks from the back, then please do speak up.
Yeah. So anyone else? And
just
Stephen,
gonna
can
add
you
a
keep
little
an
more
eye
to
on
that.
this if there's anyone here who wants to? You have to kind of wave like crazy if you're. June would like to say something. Can you unmute yourself, June?
Muted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just thinking about how when one falls out of that bliss of feeling like you're on the path, the right path, and or big life difficulties come along and you don't sort of want them, that challenge is somehow the strongest teacher. It's a weird thing that one struggles to find the right way, and you have a preconception about what that is, but when you get on a notion of wrong track, that is more of there's more learning possible there. It's difficult for me to describe what I mean, but yeah.
Absolutely.
Am I making some kind of sense?
Everyone wave if she's making sense. They're all waving out here, they're all waving in there. Yeah.
Okay, the Mexican wave, the Brazilian wave. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Stephen.
I've increasingly had the sense that I'm on a stage and I'm a player in that stage, and the relevance of that to the present moment is that I've been catching myself having debates about whether the world is improving or getting worse, and then realizing that that's just another story, and that the stage is actually a very small place in a very big universe, and that there is a place that is beyond stories and plays, and it's just the present moment.
Now this is, this, as I said earlier, we have this compulsion to name things, but another way of putting it is that we have a compulsion to kind of explain things or describe things, and I mean that I'm not meaning this in any kind of derogatory or critical way. I think this is the way we kind of bootstrap our way through life, as pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. We set an explanation, makes more sense of the world that we're in. If it's a good explanation, then it gives us the confidence and the competence to kind of move with that, which leads to new experiences which require new, fresh, slightly refined, not necessarily totally different. At the very beginning you might have had this fantastic kind of cosmic shattering experience. It's all love, right? And then 10 years later you have this incredible, gigantic reevaluation of the whole thing, and you say, you know what? It's all love. And then later on you come up with this massive new explanation. It's all about love, right? So the words, what I'm trying to say here is like we may come to a point where even our explanations are not verbally changing that much, but our interior taste and feel of it, like you can whistle the kind of theme of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, Ode to Joy or something. You can just whistle it, right? You could play it on a guitar, but it's different from a full symphony with a full choir, right? It's the same theme, right? It's getting richer and richer, and this is kind of the maturing of the wine, the maturing of the Eco-sattva ship, right? So yeah, wonderful. Yes.
Hi, my name's Amy.
Hello, Amy.
I was thinking about your comment about our yearning for belonging, and an observation that I have within myself is when I feel like I most belong is when I'm with people singing or dancing or making something or sharing food. These are moments where I feel a true sense of belonging.
Which kind of raises a question for us, I think, because this contrasts a lot to say, I mean, in a sense, what we're doing now is we're basically we're going to share food later, but right now we're just sitting here talking, using words. Humans do a lot of this, right? But when you look at it and you think of like we right now, you're frequently hearing, well, let the science speak. The science says this about, COVID, or the science says this about climate change, or so on, and that makes it kind of really deep and serious and legitimate and all that kind of stuff. And it's very, for many people, it's a very conceptual universe, right? And imagine people saying, yes, but the dancers say this, right? Or the perfumers say that, right? Or the musicians say this. These are also languages of communing, right? There are other languages, but we've right now kind of fallen into a interesting period in human history where somehow speech and verbal concepts have become the kind of dominant mode of that's acknowledged as real communication, and the rest is kind of decoration or having fun or just amusing yourself. But I mean, when we jazz with each other, like, in terms of improvising in music, when we're making music with each other, when we're dancing with each other, we're extraordinarily in the fullness of capacity of what our organism can do. But if we're doing it well, we're absolutely beautifully in tune with also the others that are doing this, and we're moving together like this. And I believe that, all of our yattering with each other is actually a kind of unconscious form of attempted worship. We're trying to have communion, right? And we're starting to slowly kind of come to the end of the possibilities of communion, maybe with verbal concepts. And we're having to rediscover many people. Yeah, so I can see this because in the examples that you gave, this is belonging, communion, and so on, are activities that are not, I mean, you can talk about, like as I say lots of times, I say to people, reading the menu isn't the same as eating the food. Right? It's going to lead to that. Patience. Right? This is.
Can I share something?
Yes. Oh, please.
I just want to touch on what man said in the front there about surrender, and I prefer to use the word acceptance of what's going on.
Yes.
So, like you're going through adversity in your life, and I actually really welcome adversity in my life because it's an opportunity to learn, and that level of acceptance and that awareness of acceptance just helps me move through it. And this follows up to another question I have, in terms of the concept of lives lived and the future lives that we're going to live, and that is awareness kind of the ability to choose to be present? Is that kind of our only sense of freedom that we have?
I don't think we choose to be present. Personally, I think we simply are present. I don't think there's any choice. I think we might try to choose to be past, or we might try to choose to be future, but it just doesn't work very well. Right? When you're sound asleep, utterly unconscious, you're totally present. You're not sleeping yesterday. I'm being a little bit kind of facetious with it, but it's kind of pointing out this sense of present is not something that we practice or choose to do. It would be presumptuous on my part anyway to say that I chose to make the universe. I kind of That doesn't quite make sense. I didn't choose this. I could say I didn't choose to be with you people. Right? I mean, it's an act of faith. Right? Just invite all these people. We don't necessarily know who's coming or anything, right? It wasn't going to go on. So this is this present, right? And as I think, there is a kind of phase of our development in which that to accept this and seeing how much we kind of delude ourselves and each other into talking about the future until you almost as if this is the future, forgetting that this is actually present talking now, right? Or remembering is not anything to do with the past. Past is just a name that we give to present thinking or remembering, because remembering is not just thinking; it's also feeling and sensing and so on. It's gonna, right? But it's just present. There's nothing special about present. There's nothing special about Green Dharma community. There's nothing special about the Aryan Sangha. It's just, that's the natural state of affairs. There's something really special about neuroses. That's unique. That's unusual. But the suchness that we are, there's nothing special about that. That's just this, right? And so increasingly we might start to realize that what we mean by choosing to be present is more remembering that we are present, right? And remembering that, and that doesn't mean not thinking about the future and not remembering or reminiscing on the past, but to recognize that I reminisce on the past because it's what I'm doing in this present moment, and it's part of, so you might go, well, why? Does this reminiscing on the past enhance this present moment, right, or not? If it does, well, you might as well keep doing it. But if it doesn't, then we might go, I wonder if I could drop that. And then in the dropping of that, we sometimes describe that as trying to be present. And people sometimes say it's so difficult to be present. It's so hard to be present. But when they say that to me, I'm always very puzzled. I go, well, how can it be difficult to be present? It's like, oh, I am present. I am perpetually and totally present. That's not bragging. You just go, so what? So's the cockroach. So's the ladybug. I'm just kind of throwing another angle on it. When we look at patience, right? Part of patience, we can have some understanding of patience if we look at absence of patience. Those moments when we get frustrated, those moments when we become irritated, those moments when we become kind of teeth gnashy, those moments where we start to kind of get, I'm trying to communicate it without using words. Right? There's this impatience, right? And it's almost as if we expect somehow the other situation, the other being, and so on, to live in a time frame that corresponds to our time frame. Okay? I mean, for years, the 6-parami is fundamental for Buddhism, so I've taught on the 6-parami many, many times over the years. And I figured, like patience, I never spent a lot of time doing patience because I kind of know patience. And then a number of years back when Mary and I we decided to start living here at 9 Windridge. And at that point it was possible to really begin to explore gardening, because it's really difficult for a transient person traveling all over the world. You can say, oh, we're embedded in nature, and meanwhile I hit on a jet, fly over to Canada, give some classes here and there and everything. I don't know where carrots come from. I don't know anything. So I decided, oh, we're going to do gardening. So I discovered all of a sudden that my beautiful, serene patience with watching, that I was actually an incredibly impatient person. I'd put the seed in the soil, right? And then I'd go out 2 days later and look, and nothing was happening. And then nothing was happening 5 days later. And then 6 days later, the whole thing had already grown and I missed it. Right? And I began to realize I'm kind of like this kind of thing of wishing it were other. And I slowly began to see that I mean, at the beginning we tried to do, what to call it, in New Zealand there's a gardening company, or I don't know what to call them, seed supplier company called Yates. And they would do this kind of the Yates gardening book. And they'd show photographs of the kind of these gardens, and you'd have your garden. You got a little popsicle stick, and on the end it's like your package with the carrot seed in it. So that's there. So I had all my carrots, seeds of carrots. Then I had parsnips, and then I'd have some beets, and then I'd have these, and I'd put them all out there, and most of them never grew to anything that was edible. And some of the things was just simply wouldn't grow. And I'd forget about them and I'd try something else. And then maybe I'd notice one year that one of the vegetables that I'd planted years earlier was popped up in another part of the garden. And I started to realize that these plants seem to prefer to be in certain areas. Instead of me saying you're going to all grow in a straight line, everyone do 100,000 prostrations. Everyone's going to do 100,000 hundreds of little mantras. This is the way you do it. Yates Dharma. Right? Little lines. Karma Karju, Hinayana, Mahayana. Right? It's all very orderly. Nice, orderly, beautiful garden. And people would come to me and say, oh, I see you're doing permaculture. And I say, well, no, I'm not doing permaculture. I'm just... I've decided to just kind of live with this earth and see what happens. And I plant lots of things and they often don't grow. And slowly you start to see things have their own timing. Weather systems, right? Moods. Have you noticed this kind of emotional? People have mood timings, periods, right? Cycles. Right? We're living cycles within cycles, timings, the whole thing, this dance of becoming. And so the willingness to actually allow the other being to live with the timing they have. Have you ever noticed this? You're really impatient because someone won't do something quickly enough. I could do that much more quickly. Right? Come on, get on with it. You're just being lazy. But after a while, this is not necessarily such a fruitful thing. You might start to observe the being as the being is. And patience arises not out of, sometimes the translation of Ksanti is patience, is forbearance. Right? Kind of forbearance. Okay, I'll put up with this. I know you've got your own timing. You have to do things your way, but I'm practicing patience. No, actually, I'm just being impatient. Patience is one of those invisible things that you can't practice. When you're patient, you never think of being patient. And when you're thinking of being patient, you're probably being impatient. Okay? And so we have at the beginning, there's this kind of forbearance. And sometimes, even in the Tibetan tradition, patience, the English word patience, right? Instead of it being translated as patience, they call it endurance. kind of, I'll endure this. Right? Think about it. And you know, in the good old days, they used to just call it stoicism. Right? You're kind of a stoic. Right? Oh yeah, my tooth's rotten, hurts, never mind, just put up with it. Right? So Tarchin's a wimp, he's just rush off to the dentist, get it fixed, it hurts. Right? But other people are just kind of put up with it. There's forbearance. Right? And it's in this area that we might start to learn kind of a certain degree of acceptance. Right? We could look at it that way. Right? There's I brought a book because I wanted to share a footnote with you. Right? I'll put on my glasses because I'll have to look at you now. I mean, I've had the whole class without glasses, so I haven't actually seen you. There's just these kind of wonderful, kind of blurry movements out there, right, which suits me fine. And this is, for those of you, one of the realities of a Green Dharma community, or a community of friends in Dharma, is that you learn to accept that everyone is at different places in their own development. Right? And you can't sort of say something that's, you're always having newbies and you're always having oldies, right? And this is why we say that good Dharma is good at the beginning, it's good in the middle, and it's good at the end, right? That it somehow can speak to people on all phases of the journey. And some beings will be, in a sense, moved by this kind of universal sense of Dharma that we're hinting at here, and be practicing Buddhists. And there will be some that are moved by this sense of universal Dharma here, and they're not interested in being practicing Buddhists. Right? So this is particularly for those who are long-term practicing Buddhists. Let me do a little book spiel. Amazon, of course, is going to give me a massive pile of extra things every time you buy a book. This is called Straight from the Heart, and it's subtitled Buddhist Pith Instructions. And I'm not recommending this to everyone. This is really deep. It's really subtle, and it's fantastically inspiring. It's translation by Karl Brunholzl. Here's the book for those of you out there in Cyberland. I don't know if I've got it lined up right for you. Right? There's lots and lots of, there's just hundreds and hundreds of Buddhist books available today. But this one it's got a lot of juice in it. Okay? Uh-oh, I just realized I took the bookmark out.
What's the book called?
It's called Straight from the Heart. It's a collection of teachings revolving around the kind of Prajnaparamita, Mahamudra, and Dzogchen traditions. Good. It's just a footnote on at some point in the book. The Maitreya is speaking about the 6-parami and this path of skillful means. Right? Skillful means, as I've sometimes pointed out, is a translation that in Buddhism we often use it interchangeably with compassion. Right? Compassion and skillful means. Right? Wisdom, compassion, non-clinging. Right? So wisdom, skillful means. These are qualities that we're moving with. Right? And in that, the 6-parami could be thought of as a path of skillful means, the path of the Bodhisattva. And under the section on Ksanti, Maitreya speaking about this, and Brunholzl, the translator, has done. He's quite an extraordinary translator and Buddhist scholar, practitioner. He also happens to be a fully qualified Western medical doctor, right? So he's not kind of just a Buddhist fanatic, right? He's studied the human body from a scientific perspective as well, and I really value his attempts to make the Dharma more real. So this is about Ksanti, right? K-S-A-N-T-I. And by the way, Ksanti, or sometimes Shanti, means peace. So it's an interesting wonder what they mean. What's the extra K? You know, there's peace plus K. Ksanti. Right? It's patience. It's got something to do with peacefulness in the midst of the unexpected challenge which inevitably comes up. Right? Or actually, it's not right to say the unexpected challenge. It's usually the challenge of expectations that come up. It's not really unexpected at all. It's actively manufactured. The expectation, and somehow the expectation the garden isn't doing what I wanted it to do, what it was supposed to do. Right? And here I was, I gave all this liberating instruction to this person, and they went away and they came back and they're still miserable. What's the matter with you? You don't practice hard enough. You're not doing it right. You're stupid or something. It's like, huh? And at that moment, we're not actually seeing that this being, in all their confusion, is an arising of billions of years of evolution, giving rise to this. And my problem is I can't see the wisdom in this being, not this being isn't living up to my expectations. Okay? Patience has something to do with a kind of a peacefulness in the midst of just the reality of the uncontrollableness of life. This is why it's an absolute necessary quality to have, patience. Because life is fundamentally uncontrollable. You may think you got it totally together and then it doesn't work. When the patience is raised to at the beginning it's kind of forbearance, then it starts to become acceptance, and then it starts to become, we have this phrase that you come across in the Mahamudra and the Dzogchen, poised readiness. I really like that idea of poised readiness. It's like just kind of poised, you're ready to kind of move however the situation requires, right? This is patience, it's poised readiness. Okay? So, in a general sense, Ksanti refers to being mentally ready for the Dharma of non-arising. Mentally ready for the Dharma of ungraspableness, of emptiness. Okay? Thus here, poised readiness does not mean passively enduring or bearing something. In other words, and in this sense, it's not just merely accepting something. Okay? But rather indicates an active openness and receptiveness to integrate the experience of emptiness, of ungraspableness, of unpindownableness into one's mind stream, and to be able to live within this utter groundlessness. And this is where the word surrender is perhaps also useful. Like acceptance has a place with it, but that's more like still possibly learning to bear with it, to accept it, and so on. But when we talk about an active openness and receptivity in your being, to integrate the experience of emptiness into one's mind stream, so that this kind of intuitive sense of the ungraspable nature of everything is starting to integrate into the stream of how I am, how I say hello to Mary in the morning, right? How I cook the porridge, how I play the guitar, how I don't play the guitar, how I, struggle with this ornery garden which won't do what I want it to do, right? It becomes integrated into everything that I do. Right? This poised readiness just to be there. Right? Consider this. Is it a practice that you can do like 1, 2, 3, 4? You can't really do this, but it's more like a sense of a feeling for a way of, can I bring this poised readiness into my formal meditation practice? Can I bring this poised readiness into how I engage with the various people in my workplace, how I engage with my children, how I engage with the government and big decisions and all that kind of stuff, how I engage with climate change?
Poised readiness does not sound like resignation.
No, not at all. Right? A sense of an active openness. And I think this is not Brunholzel's translation of Maitripa. This is his attempt to try and explain it. I think there's lots in here. Active openness rather than just kind of passive openness. There's an openness which is like an active receptivity. Right? You're kind of like, there's responsiveness happening in all directions. Right? Think of the times when you're impatient. Usually it's the opposite. You're more closed, you're less responsive, you're not dancing, you're prancing, but you're not dancing. It's not possible to awaken without dancing. It's not possible to awaken without eating. It is possible to awaken without intellectualizing. Because the intellectualizing is just the explanation that we're telling ourselves, the story that we're inventing to make sense of the dance. Let me read this again. Thus here, poised readiness does not mean passively enduring or bearing something, but rather indicates an active openness and receptiveness to integrate the experience of emptiness into one's mind stream and to be able to live within this utter groundlessness. And so although, the first 4 parami, generosity, wholesome relating, patience, skilled use of energy, in the system of the 6 parami, these are kind of the ground that's preparing for the 5th parami, which is meditation, samadhi. We haven't even started to meditate, right? But you begin to look at it and you realize, no, actually, approached in this way, in this kind of universal sense, each one of these is the whole. It's like a hologram. Every part of the hologram contains the whole, right? The entire of awakening in the practice of generosity, the entire of awakening in the practice of wholesome relating, the entire of awakening in the practice of patience. And what you probably will find is that there are times in your life where one of these practices feels to be really what you're working on. It's really valuable to have a sense that there's something you can work on and work with. There's something really victimizing to feel there's nothing you can do and there's nothing you can work with and there's nothing you can contribute. Right? This is how it's so absolutely important that we can make these things ours. These are extraordinarily deep tools which can be utilized at all sorts of different levels. Right? There's sometimes when it should be good just to remind to kind of hang in there. You know, it's rather humbling when I go off screaming about my little toothache, you know, and then I meet some kind of older generation person quite often. Of course, I'm becoming older generation. And then they're sitting there and they're, you know, their teeth are falling out and they got arthritis and they got this and they never complain. You know, and I go, oh, you know, I mean, they weren't practicing Buddhism, and yet they're much more kind of just there with it. Okay? You can, oh, and I go, oh, maybe I could do that. maybe that becomes an inspiration, and we actually become inspirations for each other to remember what's important in times when we've temporarily forgotten. Okay? So this is all I'd like to say about patience, really. There's just trying to give a sense of how it can cover a whole range from just having patience with, by reminding yourself, when you're really impatient with somebody else, make it really ordinary. Right? It's one thing to be impatient with another person, but actually if you get impatient with your dog, it sometimes becomes a little bit more obvious there's something wrong with you being impatient with the dog. Like there's when I'm impatient with a person, then there's something wrong with them. When I'm impatient with our cat, right, I begin to realize, oh, actually cat's got its own rhythms, right? She's got her own kind of patterns, right? And I can't expect the cat to respond here. The thing that where it gets really crazy, you've probably never ever done this, right? But it's getting impatient with an inanimate object. The bloody door's stuck again, and you kick it, and then you hurt your toe. Damn! Right? Whereas actually the thing would be to get some oil and maybe put it on the hinges. Right? It's stuck because it's stuck. It's because it's humid and everything, all the wood's swollen up, and it's sort of, you know, you get a plane and plane down the edge of the door or something, there's more room. I bet none of you, this is confession time. I'm just confessing of like how deluded that I've mostly been in my life, that I have actually found myself getting impatient with inanimate objects. Right? You people probably never experienced this. You haven't come to such depths of delusion. Right? But the sense of at least we can have some forbearance, right? And we kind of, that too will pass. There's all kinds of things that we can do in the name of patience. But in a deeper sense, right, this becomes kind of forbearance. It becomes poised readiness. It becomes surrendering into the interbeing nature. It doesn't say I surrender into the interbeing nature. It's just surrendering. Right? So, are there any last comments or thoughts or questions? And that's, otherwise I'm...
Cats are often a great example of poised readiness.
Aren't they? Yeah. Yeah.
True.
Yeah. Dawa, I think I see you waving.
I had a big. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I had a big question before about how it seems to me that, like, the deeper the sense of connection and understanding that we come to, like, when I fall off that wagon, the worse the suffering. And the question was about how to remember what you've forgotten when you're in that swampy place. And I'm getting the fear, I'm not sure if this is a statement or a question, that perhaps the only thing that I need to remember is to be patient with that actual state.
Mm-hmm.
It's a quite terrifying place to be. And so, like, is it feasible that you can be in that terror and go and remember, even just, or be patient? Or do you sometimes just have to wait until you can remember to remember?
I have empathy for what you're saying, because I think it's like when you're deeply in the grip of such a moment, it's really real and big, right?
Yeah.
And I'm speaking about it not from in that moment, right?
Yeah.
But I think that we need to be reminded. I think sometimes we don't remember as so much as we are reminded.
Yeah.
And if I'll make an extreme thing, and this is a big problem we've had just recently, with the kind of level 4 lockdowns with COVID. Some people have found themselves isolated in a room, especially elderly people, in some care facilities and so on, and the contact with others has been cut down to a minimum, right? Mm-hmm. So you're isolated into the room of your life, and there's no kind of living beings there to remind you, right?
Yeah.
And you're reminded not by what the person says, but what they are. And so we're coming back to the beginning of this, our session today, this community of friends in Dharma. That we need a community of friends in Dharma. We need to feel that we are participants in a green Dharma community. And the bigger that community is for us, like in a sense, in a real sense, the more beings that can act as reminders for us. The smaller the community is for us. If the community is just the 5 people that live in my house and that's it, then if those 4 aren't there, the other 4 aren't there, then there's no one to remind me, right? By their action. And so just to be in the presence of someone who's a little bit more settled and calm, when we've, as you say, fallen off the wagon. Now, someone only falls off the wagon if they've been on the wagon to begin with, right? So we're talking about that. I'm not saying that you take any problem and they just be with someone else who's. I found this didn't work. I used to sort of sit there in a very calm space, and people would come in and they're full of stuff, and I just sit there really calm and listen. And yes, and I remember in Christchurch, one person was leaving after this, and she said she whipped around before she left the room. This was back in the early 80s. And she said to me, what bugs me about you Buddhists? I was kind of shocked. I was a monk at the time. I thought, I was just very calm. She's telling me all these terrible problems, and I'm going, it's all emptiness, and it's totality, and the universe unfolding. I'm not saying this, but I'm feeling this. I'm in this beautiful, benign, loving state, and she turns around and, bugs me. You're so damn calm. Right? And I suddenly realized that actually in order to begin the dialogue with people who were in that kind of state, I had to say, they came in and said, I got this terrible problem. Like, oh no, that's awful. And then, Tarzan really understands me. And I'm kind of faking out that this is the terrible problem they're having, when actually I'm seeing 4 billion years of evolution dancing this unique kind of thing in front of me, right? And so I had to fake that what they thought was, so in that situation, it doesn't work. But if we're talking about having a practitioner who falls off the wagon, I'm just using your words, right? Then actually sometimes just to be in the presence of another being who's not fallen off the wagon, just the way they walk, the way they move, the way they look, the way they use their eyes, not what they say. Lots of times it gets eclipsed because you go, what should I do? And my friends tell, your problem is you should do this. Dawa, you should do more anapanasati. You should do more, and I'm being a friend in Dharma, reminding you of your practice. No, shouldn't say a word. Right? And yet to just be this for one of the acts of generosity in our trainings in wholesome living is to be an example to others of awakening in action. And I've forgotten what awakening in action is. And then I'm with someone who sometimes I would just walk into the presence of Namjal and he doesn't say anything, and just I just feel, people come here sometimes, they say, I feel different being here. I'm not saying anything. That's the osmosis. You're just kind of picking up something that and you're kind of, it's a visceral back on track, not an intellectual back on track.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so what we could do is we could take steps to expand our appreciation of the Dharma community that we are, right? Out of sheer desperation to have more beings who could potentially remind us. So the cat walks around the corner and, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder, I make up all these fantastic stories. Shortly after I had a cancer diagnosis, and I'd had surgery, and I was feeling a lot of pain and a lot of discomfort, a lot of dysfunction, and I was staying in the hut down below, and Greycoat, our cat, that never done this before, came down and climbed on my bed and slept with me that night.
Yeah.
Right? And I found it extraordinarily not just comforting in a kind of superficial way. It was like the remember,
the reminder,
this universe, right? Speaking through. So to be, this is why I'm saying green Dharma community rather than Buddhist Dharma community or bald robe-wearing community. It's not big enough for me. I'm too dumb. I fall off the wagon too often. I need more reminders.
Yeah.
So in a certain sense, you could say my practice has been a practice of opening up my appreciation for the profundity of ordinary, so that, in the context of our conversation, so that the ordinary can act as a reminder to me when I've forgotten.
Yeah.
So it's a mistake to lock ourselves up in our rooms. Right? We need community. I'd like to stop on that note. Okay?
Thanks.
And perhaps we can just sit for a moment. By the power of these wholesome activities, may our lives be rich with awakening. Living thus, may we abandon all unwholesomeness. Through the endless storm of birth, illness, old age, and death, may we help all beings to realize their true interbeing, interknowing nature. Sarva Mangalam. Sarva Mangalam. Sarva Mangalam. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Patch.
Thank you wherever you are in the world, right? May all be well for you.